Kilen Gray is a friend, a dear friend, and colleague. We teach together in the Doctor of Ministry program with delight and we hope edification for our students. He serves as the Dean of Community Life at Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary, and it just took up the interim pastorate post at First Baptist Church, Jeffersonville, Kentucky, out of which he will be speaking this afternoon, the Black Church and Interim Ministry. Dr. Gray, welcome to this consultation, the third that you have done in our rural ministry series, and you are the instigator through a relational meeting that you and I had about what we needed to do and how we needed to rethink Black church studies. And it was you that said we need to look at rural ministry and African American ministry because there is very little scholarship and research there. And we are now in the third year of your generative thinking. Thank you very much, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kauser. It is my privilege. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
It's my privilege and my honor to be here and to be a part of the Black Church Studies program under your leadership, Dr. Kauser. We have seen this program grow in large ways, and the engagement that you have successfully made with our Doctorate of Ministry students and our master level students, the higher accountability for scholarship, yes, and for the way that these projects are being shaped. Yes. It has just been for the benefit not only of the seminary, but for the church. And so we just thank you for your leadership. And it's my home girl. It is always good to work with somebody that's from the big M. You hear what I'm saying?
There you go. The big M. There you go. MEMPHIS.
That's it. That's
not
it.
To put too fine a point on it. All right.
Hey, that's right.
Thank you.
So I want to thank you all that are in the room. Thank you for coming to the consultation. And I thank you for your attention in this particular project idea. I've asked Dr. Kauser to afford me the privilege to share, with this being a consultation. I wanted to benefit from the length and breadth of the wisdom that's in this room and do a project pitch for something that I'm going to be intimately engaged in. But also I'm hoping that this will redound to benefit for Black Baptist congregations in particular, not only not to ignore the full swath of our Pan-African Methodist and other traditional Black church denominations, but as a Baptist, having Black Baptist I've been Black Baptist all my life. There are several aspects of my beloved denomination where we need some help. And so I just wanted to share this particular project idea with you, and I will welcome your comments and your questions as this is in early formulation. The name of this presentation is going to be modified a bit. I've got in the program, it is the Black Church and Interim Ministry, but I'm going to specify it as Black Baptist Interim Ministry. And you'll hear as part of my presentation the reason why I wanted to nuance this in that way. So on February the 2nd of this year, I began a journey with the historic First Baptist Church of Jeffersontown, Kentucky, as their interim pastor, February 2nd of this year. It certainly was not my plan to be serving again in pastoral leadership, for in September of 2020, I ended a 35-year tenure as the senior pastor of the New Mount Zion Baptist Church of Shelbyville, Kentucky. That was my first pastoral assignment ever in my ministry, and now I'm in my second assignment as interim pastor. My plans were, after a long tenure of pastoral service, was to ride off into the sunrise with my wife and take an endured respite from pastoral organizational leadership. But I was, and I continue to be reminded of the faith declarations of the elders of my faith formation, including my 100-year-old mother and the elders of the Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church of Memphis, who would say, man appoints, God disappoints. a mere 2 months after I had ended my tenure at New Mount Zion, during the preparatory moment of the pastoral installation of one of my pastoral colleagues, the moderators of both local and state Baptist association in this state approached me to ask my interest in interim service. I don't have enough time to tell you how the full conversation went, but it wasn't quite scrappy, but you hear what I'm saying. My plan was to go right off in the sunrise. I had already made my plans. And after much initial resistance on my part, but continued moderatorial persistence on their part, and blessed conversation with the church's search committee, and the most important conversation, which was the conversation with the Reverend Cassandra Denise Gray, my wife, I consented to be considered, and here I am today. And during that process of consideration for service by the search committee of First Baptist of Jeffersontown, and soon after the church's affirmation was received, I began to afford myself a personal liberty to relish in the idea after all of the consideration. And here's the significant reason why. This church rose to prominence under the significant leadership of the Reverend Dr. Thurman Coleman, who was for us in our denomination beloved by the congregation, by First Baptist Church. But for those of us who were pastors in the association, this gentle giant was larger than life. We affectionately called him Reverend Granddaddy. He was just that type of an individual for those of us coming up in the ministerial ranks. Whenever he taught a class within our associational life, we tried to grapple for a seat in his course to benefit from the wisdom of the years of service, fine service that he provided there. And so the idea of being in the line of succession of leadership at the church where he served for over 40 years, and as much as he has been endeared to me, that was worth relishing. But more important for the presentation today is to also follow in his footsteps in interim leadership. After he retired as pastor of the First Baptist Church of Jeffersontown, he availed himself to serve as an interim pastor for a few churches within our association within the city of Louisville. And his leadership, just as with First Baptist Church Jeffersontown, his interim leadership in these congregations made the difference between these congregations thriving or not. And I since learned that has been sort of an unofficial response of the Central District Baptist Association. It's been a practice over the years that when churches are in transition, the unofficial practice would be that they would have retired pastors who have served their congregations long and well. After they retire, they would invite them to be considered by these churches as they searched for, if the church made the decision to hire an interim, then the Central District Association would recommend to these congregations to consider these persons. They could choose whoever they wanted to choose, but they encouraged them, highly encouraged them to consider these sages of our denomination. And they have served these congregations very, very well. Central District Baptist Association has done this practice. And so I relish the idea that they would choose this young tyke like me to be in that line of substantive leaders. But then a subsequent thought captivated me while I was affording myself this relish. Where are local, state, and national Baptist associations and conventions with regard to interim ministry? And why is not there any intentional, focused support for transitional congregations and those who may be called to such a ministry? Do Baptist associations have a structured, intentional ministry for congregations who are in transition? And if so, what does that look like? Is there interest within local, statewide, and or national Baptist bodies to develop a structured ministry of that type? And if so, then what are the challenges to that development? These questions arise from a belief that interim ministry is a viable and much needed call within ministry. It is a gap that is not considered by many seminaries. It is a reality that is not talked about much among ministry circles, but more and more churches who end up in transition need the guidance of skilled leaders to ensure that they don't lose any momentum in their forward motion toward fulfilling their vision and their mission. Transitions in pastoral leadership can make or break churches in general, but especially independent churches that are run by congregational polity, and even more so, independent Black congregations who are in rural areas. And over my 35 years of my tenure at New Mount Zion Baptist Church, I have seen the lack of support that rural Black Baptist congregations have had over the years, when there has not been adequate, appropriate, informed transitional leadership for these congregations. While a large number of independent churches benefit from their association with associational connections, and in the Baptist church, all of those churches have autonomy. They are able to determine their own destiny. They're independent. And if they're in statewide, local, or national groups, it is by voluntary association. So there is no requirement for these congregations to be part of movements or groups larger than their local congregation. And with all of those types of connections, those of you who are in much more stronger connectional relationships know that there's a lot of money that comes with that. And so in order to be a part of these associations, most rural congregations may not have the type of budget that would support their national connection in national Baptist groups. And so for a lot of rural Black Baptist congregations, either they do the best that they can independently, or they are left to themselves to forge associations that would be supportive. And there's a lot that's missed in that arena. The autonomous nature of Baptist church polity, while one of our signature strengths, has the tendency to enhance denominational disconnection, especially within congregations which do not have a history of associational life. Pastoral transitions within these congregations can become treacherous for the congregation if there are no protective factors that exist within the congregation to mitigate that state. So my questions also arrive from learning about how other denominations have addressed the issue of congregational transition with regard to pastoral leadership. Just my early preliminary research I've learned that the American Baptist Convention, various state Baptist conventions, and outside of the Baptist Fellowship, some of the Pan-African fellowships, the United Methodist Church, the Presbyterian Church USA, and the United Church of Christ are examples of denominations who have developed over time intentional structural efforts toward interim ministry. And from the witness of those that I have called preliminarily, it has been to the benefit of not only the churches, but for the denomination as a whole. It has been the strength of the denominations, and it has given to these congregations a sense of broader and wider connection, which is so needed, particularly in my view, for rural Baptist congregations. So therefore, my interest is twofold. Plainly, I want to know what's up with us Baptists. Why is it that there is no energy within our national bodies and in many of our state and local associations? Why there is no energy toward developing this type of structural, intentional ministry toward transitional ministry and interim pastoral ministry? So I hope that during this project that I'm about to start, I hope to learn if there is any energy for it. Do my Baptist colleagues have any interest or energy for developing a much more intentional transitional ministry? And are they willing to establish offices, establish structural responses for that need? I also hope to develop case studies of a few Black Baptist congregations who are currently journeying with interim pastors and hoping to document the learnings from both the laity and the pastors as they walk together during an interim period. I'm interested in discovering the forces, both theological, historical, sociological, political, and relational, which contribute to the lack of intentional focus within my denomination on congregational transition. I've already made initial contacts with colleagues with 4 of the major Black Baptist national bodies, each who have intimated that my research interest holds great promise. These pastors and denominational leaders have immediate access to denominational top leadership who can give guidance on how to navigate the political realities of each group that would be helpful for what one of my colleagues called, "You about to make an uphill climb, brother." And so I want to try to learn about that and find out why it's such an uphill climb. I'm interested in discovering more information of the dynamics of congregational polity as it is practiced by Black Baptist congregations from various levels, from the laity level, from the pastoral level, and the denominational level, to inform my hypothesis regarding this topic, to ensure that my work is not hindered by the curse of the familiar. And what I mean by that is I've been in this denomination for 35 years. I'm blinded. I've got some blindness about it. And I just want to make sure that I don't just take for granted what I think I know. And so I'm going to be asking the kinds of questions from persons of different experiences and different contexts to make sure that I balance out my assumptions and test out my hypotheses. I believe that Black Baptist congregations should benefit from the blessing of an intentional congregational transition ministry. Since other denominations, both Black and white in predominance, have discovered the benefit to be enough to commit resources to develop an intentional effort to support their congregations, I believe that Black congregations, especially rural Black congregations, should not suffer needlessly because of our lack of support of churches in this area. So this is my project idea. It's very, very preliminary, and I toss it now to the consultation for questions and for conversations and some things that I can think about as I begin to shape this project idea.
Thank you so much. This is Reverend Stephanie Welsh. I actually do have a question. It's a 2-part question. One, how long would you anticipate an interim person to serve? And perhaps this isn't a follow-up question, because I have a number of friends who are Baptist preachers, and have had a friend who was a moderator, and have heard of Baptist churches intentionally taking an extended period of time to call a full-time pastor. And what I have heard has been the rationale is that they know that if they either have an interim or if they have rotating preachers to come every Sunday, they don't have to worry about paying the benefits that a full-time pastor might receive. So how do you envision this to look? And I would also imagine that there will be some pushback, or maybe that will force them to make their decisions quicker. So I hope I just didn't confuse the issue with the extras.
Absolutely not. Well, that's a good question. Thank you so much for asking it. And that does happen because of the lack of any denominational support, training for congregations, support for those who are being formed in this type of ministry. Those types of things do happen where you have congregations who take advantage of interim ministry, and you have inter-ministry who take advantage of churches. And so it goes both ways in churches with congregational polity. So that is a reality. The wisdom from other denominations who provide training about this range the terms for interim to be between 12 to 24 months as a healthy span of time. But it really will depend upon the context of the congregation and the particular way that the previous pastorate may have ended, particularly if there's been a lot of pain and anguish within the congregation. Many times those are the dynamics that will determine the time. And I think it will be determined by how the interim pastor and the congregation in their communication, in their navigation together, how they determine what that time is going to be. It's going to be different. I think it would be a mistake to put every congregation, and especially every Black Baptist congregation, in a cookie cutter approach to say that, this is how long it needs to be. I think that the dynamics of the congregation and the needs of the congregation should determine it. But also with that question is the reality of congregational polity, and I'm trying not to make a joke about it, but I'm Baptist, I can do that. Is that Baptist folk end up doing whatever they want to do, and what I mean by that is by parliamentary procedures through Robert's Rules of Order. If they can determine what they choose to do, even in the midst of having made agreements to the contrary prior. And so that's just one of those dynamics of our way of life. The history of Baptists is that even from the first inception, we were splitting, even between the beginning of our history. And so all I'm trying to say is that, yes, that's a possibility. Yes, there's possibilities of being taken advantage of, both from the congregation's side to the pastor, and then from the pastor to the congregation. This is what training and preparation, this is what an intentional ministry can mitigate. Intentional ministry of transitional ministry for these congregations can prepare congregations as much as possible on the pros and cons of transitional ministry, what's needed to help the congregation to prepare for interim ministry, and then how to prepare the pastors who sense a call to interim ministry to remind them that this doesn't move into permanence. This is something to be to help churches reclaim their mission and their values, to rediscover who they are, and to prepare themselves for their permanent movement in the future. And so I think that if there's a good office of support, it could hopefully mitigate those types of dynamics that you've intimated in your question.
Thank you.
Dr. Gray.
Yes.
Eric Shoemake, how you doing, sir?
How you doing, my good friend?
Good. Great presentation. In our denomination, as I have been heavily involved in searching our discipline, we do not have a set program of interim ministry because of the structure of our church, because our bishop makes assignments. And when there is a vacancy, he is the one that makes the assignment. And if there is a need for someone to fill in for a very short period of time, he and the presiding elder either search for someone, or the elder provides that leadership on a temporary basis.
Gotcha.
So it's different for us in the Methodist Church than in the Baptist Church. And here's my question. What would be the struggle between the state organization or the moderator system and the local church and their autonomy, with the state organization providing or requiring for the local church to do or to participate in the interim ministry?
Thank you, sir. The mitigation from the struggle would be the invitation to participate in it. So since it's voluntary association, local districts and statewide bodies can't force Baptist congregations to participate. We can only offer those types of trainings, and those churches and those who choose to participate in that would participate in it. So statewide and local associations are not, by nature of who we are not in the position to force. Now, I'm saying that knowing the history of the National Baptist Convention, I know that there have been ways that those types of coercive ways of impressing upon congregations to toe the national line. That's a real deal. All you have to look at the Southern Baptist Convention and see that in full swing. But really, for Black Baptists, and particularly the way that it is done in Kentucky, associational leadership, whether it's statewide or district-wide, comes in by invitation of the congregation. And so if there are some things that the association offers to local congregations, it is done in agreement. It is not done by force. It is not done by fiat.
Okay.
But there are historical evidences to the contrary. I'm just saying.
Dr.
Thank
Gray,
you, sir.
this is your classmate, Dr. McIntosh.
What's up, classmate?
Question, you mentioned about the fact of it not being a road to permanency. And so far, what I've observed among my Baptist friends is that that term interim becomes a stepping stone to being called as the permanent pastor. How do you propose to change that thinking within your context? That taking an interim call is a temporary or transitional assignment, but not one that you take in the hopes that the congregation will eventually, after a couple of years, say, we like you, we ain't searching no more, you'll become our permanent pastor.
So the hope of being able to develop, the hope of being able to develop intentional ministries within our denomination to develop transitional ministries include with that those, first of all, who sense a call to interim ministry. And that might minimize the number of persons who would be who we're talking about with that, because that does happen a lot. What happens is a person becomes an interim, they get called as an interim, and then eventually, by dynamics within that is unique to the local congregation, they will call that person. Even churches I've known across the country who have polity that and rules that says that the pastor who is an interim pastor cannot become a permanent pastor. Even with those rules, they'll have a meeting and they will, by Robert's Rules of Order, they can dismiss the previous order and make that happen. What most denominations who have this type of intentional structural ministry, they recommend to churches those who have been trained to know different and to be trained to know better. That's what they recommend. The caveat in this is that the church does not have to take what is recommended by the association and their suggestion on that. But when congregations are trained and when there's work by denominational forces to help the congregations to develop the types of policy that they need and to walk along with them as they do their search and as they prepare for that, the tendency is that congregations will eventually abide by those types of things if they have the right type of support and training that helps them to know the difference. But the tendency may not go away even with the offices and the structure that I'm proposing. Congregations can still do what they choose to do.
Kilen, I think my experience with this process in the different denominations, that they build in something that's kind of a protection, that they build in an ethical standard for internship, that you cannot take it, you cannot accept it if you do not abide by the ethical position, that you will never take a position in a church when you've been called as an interim. And that is built into the agreement between the pastor, the clergy person, and the denomination that's providing the resources and support for that ministry. So they are ethically bound by that. They cannot do it. They must let the congregation know that they cannot do it and will not do it.
Absolutely.
Because that is the ethical standard that they have accepted for this ministry.
Absolutely.
It would be the same way it would be in law and legal law, the ethical standards that are set, the lawyers cannot violate. This is the same thing. So maybe that's one way of at least discussing some element of that in a process to do this.
The hope is that Baptist congregations will be open to being trained to build their level of awareness to that, because we know that especially in rural spaces and in some urban spaces, there's no awareness of that at all. And by the time the transition happens, depending on how that transition hit, if it's a transition because of pastoral malfeasance, or if it's a transition because of the retirement of a long-term beloved pastor, some congregations' tendencies are to hurry up and get somebody, and without taking the time to really do some focused preparation. And it is during that focused preparation that these types of ethical and structural and governmental types of standards can be taught and can be shared with the congregation. But I agree with you. It is ethical. It is very ethical to make sure that as an interim, that you make a stance as an ethical pastor, but also that congregations have the types of structures within them that does not allow that type of extension from interim into permanence.
Kilen, you have a question from Amy Snow.
Hey, Dr. Gray. I just wanted to say, as a Presbyterian, my husband is an intentional interim pastor. And what you're saying resonates with me. And in Presbyterian churches that he's served, he goes in and analyzes the politics and the power structures in the churches and the congregation. And it's his job to hold up a mirror to the congregation and to help them understand how they're functioning, many times in dysfunctional ways. Now, I can only speak to the Presbyterian church. I don't know if you have those issues in the Baptist tradition, but
oh yes,
so,
oh yes.
But it's so important for the congregations to understand that as they get healthy and as they listen to this prophetic voice that's asking them to look at themselves, that they can look for a better fit in their pastor and they can be better prepared to welcome the next person that arrives. And so really it's their own work that they're doing for their benefit. And the research has shown that the churches that have an interim minister have a much smoother next pastorate after that. So I applaud the work that you're doing, and I think it's fantastic.
Thank you so much. And added to that, Pastor, is the need to reestablish justice within the congregation, especially within congregations with congregational polity. In Baptist congregations, the congregation is supposed to be the final voice. The congregation is supposed to be the one that where all of us who work and all of us who serve, we get our authority to serve from the congregation. And so in an interim time, it is a wonderful time to reestablish the power dynamics of a congregation, to make sure that justice is practiced and established or reestablished. Because there are sometimes in the journey of pastoral leadership and congregation that power differential gets like this. And it's not good for anybody. It's not good for anybody where congregations no longer feel empowered to share in the determination of vision for the direction of a congregation. So interim times are great moments for that rebalancing of ethical, moral power that should be shared with that is given within the polity of Baptist congregations.
Yeah.
Dr. Gray, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I just want to, as we come up on the end here, I just want to, first of all, thank you for your presentation and for the auspicious beginning of this research, and hope that our Black Church Studies program can assist in that research and maybe
Absolutely.
establish Louisville Seminary as a place not only for African American rural ministry, but for also African American interim ministry, and it's a study in good practice. Just to note that Willis Temple Ritchie, who is another student in our D-Min Showcase, will speak to a cognate aspect of this issue tomorrow, looking at clergy succession in the African American free will Baptist tradition. So it's a succession question, which is cognate to this and part of the interim question that you raised.
Excellent.
And perhaps at consultation next year, if this research goes well and the Lord wills, that you will make a full presentation of your findings.
Absolutely.
Oh, did you, Loretta, can you read that question, please? Loretta Baker.
Yes, my focus is congregational care. And so recently I was a former member of First Gethsemane, and they experienced sudden death. And so they found themselves, even though they had the structure, they had someone who could step in, there's a certain amount of congregational care that needs to be taken. So even though we need how to do politics and how to find a preacher and how to find a pastor, and they now get their new powers, there's still a certain amount of care. And especially when it's sudden, but even when people just don't want to give up. I'm sure, Dr. Gray, there were people in your congregation who just didn't want you to leave.
Absolutely,
and
yes, indeed.
They're wounded because you're gone.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Please just add that and consider that in your study.
Absolutely. Thank you for that suggestion. Thank you for that. Congregational care, by the way, especially for those denominations that have a structured practice of that, is signature. It's a signature part of interim ministry. I mean, it's signature to do congregational care, even when there's an amicable separation of a pastor from a congregation. There is still the need to do pastoral care, to do listening sessions, to hear people out, to hear their thoughts and their feelings and their emotions about where they are, to give an assessment of dreams and aspirations of the congregation. That's the interim work. And so, yes, absolutely. We will definitely keep that in mind as we develop these solutions for our churches. Thank you so much for that.